Food is fuel for your body, your mind, and definitely your sport. But let's face it, nutrition is confusing, and the expectations on girls and women to be thin and have a six-pack are exhausting. If you've ever been frustrated with your body, confused about nutrition, obsessed with eating healthy, or guilty when you don't, underate, overate, or overtrained, and overwhelmed with all the pressure, then this podcast is for you. Nutrition can be easy, you can take control of it, but it might start with letting go of control by asking for help and making a change. I'm Lindsay Elizabeth Cortez, sports dietitian and owner of Rise Up Nutrition, where I empower female athletes to overcome nutrition concerns and perform at their highest level, to stop being confused by all the mixed or harmful messages, and finally have confidence in your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete.
All right, everybody, we have two guests with us today on the Female Athlete Nutrition Podcast. We have Megan and David Roche. Megan herself is the 2016 USATF Trail Runner of the Year at ultra and sub-ultra distances. She's a 5-time national champion, a North American mountain running champion, and 6-time member of Team USA. Megan graduated from Duke University with a degree in neuroscience and received her MD from Stanford Medical School. At Stanford, she is currently doing a PhD in epidemiology, focused on population health and genetics for athletes. And Megan started coaching with Some Work All Play, aka SWAP, in 2016. And she's also here with David Roche, who's the 2014 USATF Trail Runner of the Year at sub-ultra distances. He's a 2-time national champion and 3-time member of Team USA. He graduated from Columbia University with a degree in environmental science and received a master's degree and law degree from Duke University. And David actually started SWAP, Some Work All Play. He started the SWAP team in 2013. So each one of these people are outstanding people individually, and together just a powerhouse. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having us. We're really pumped about this conversation and just love the idea that there's a whole podcast devoted to female athlete nutrition. And just really, we've heard a ton about the work that you've done in the female athlete and overall athlete community, and just really grateful for you.
Yeah, this is the coolest. Thanks so much for what you do. And thanks to everyone for listening to, such a world-changing and important subject matter. And we're honored to be here.
Yeah. Oh, thank you guys so much. Yeah, we're going to talk about so much. I think I already know that I think a lot of our philosophies align. So I think that is a good thing, but also we have such different backgrounds and strengths and expertise. So we definitely want to pick your brain on a lot of things. Okay. So I'm going to start with a totally personal question if you guys are down for it.
That's great.
Giving you a big thumbs up over here. Yep.
Okay. Totally personal question. How did you guys meet? Where did you guys meet?
Oh, I love that. I think that's the first time we've been asked that on a podcast.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start. So when I was in college, there's this woman on the track team named Hannah Kligman, who, I think she would fully embrace being called a character. She nowadays, for example, to fast forward to now, she's doing smoke jumping firefighting. And
I think she's actually the first female smoke jumper. She's just super impressive.
Yeah, she's so impressive. But we met when I was in college, and she's like, "Oh, you need to meet my friend." And this was even before she knew I was going to Duke. And so eventually when I wound up at Duke, where Megan was finishing school, we eventually were able to meet for ice cream after 10 times canceling on each other for busy schedules.
We definitely canceled on each other 10 times. And then when we met for ice cream, we just talked for 2.5 hours. And we were up probably for both of us 3 hours past our bedtime and closed the ice cream shop down. And then we're like, oh yeah, we definitely need to meet up again. So,
but I think meeting over ice cream is perhaps the most appropriate thing of all, especially for this podcast.
But I was prepared for you to
I agree.
Very, very weird given our mutual connection, because she was, a character as David described. And you were very weird to meet that standard, but not very, very, very weird.
Yeah, okay.
I was expecting.
It's just numbers of varies.
No, I totally agree. The fact that this is a win for ice cream, and why people should eat ice cream, because you might just meet, your life partner and soulmate over ice cream.
Yeah, you learn a lot about someone from their toppings choices.
I was going to say, so actually, given that this is a nutrition podcast, I think this is very topical. David ordered potato chips as a topping on his ice cream. And I was like, this
wow.
is the very weird category of David. But I was also impressed, and I was kind of I like this guy. He's an interesting order.
He's a free thinker.
Yes.
He's trying to think. Perhaps a culinary genius, I might even say.
Perhaps. You never know. Yeah, it definitely sparks curiosity of somebody who's going to put potato chips on their ice cream. So awesome.
It's all about the crunchiness, which might be why we match so well.
So funny. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, because you guys have such like, you're impressive people, but like your backgrounds, like your bios are so loaded. So it was like, it's just like, yeah, it makes sense that you two would find each other. And so I was curious as to how. But so I wanted to ask about your running journeys. Of course, you're both running coaches and you both competed in college, cross country and track and field. Am I right?
Actually, so I played field hockey in college and then took a fifth year to run track and cross country. And it was kind of mind boggling, actually, the difference in like cultures between like a field hockey team and a track and cross country team. And it was very interesting to take that journey and, try a totally different sport in college. And David was a football player at Columbia and actually never ran track. And so we both have very unique kind of like journeys into the running world.
Yeah. And I mean, I think relevant too for this subject matter because, both of us have our physical forms have changed slightly from like when I was a football player, it was just my first year, but my neck was like 18 inches wide. I mean, it was kind of looked like a cartoon character. And Megan as a field hockey player, was doing big squats at the gym. It was just a slightly different athlete. So, over time, our approaches to athletics really shifted. And it was actually great when we were meeting each other, we were really starting to engage with running more fully for the first time. I mean, Megan was still playing field hockey at Duke. She was a top recruit in the country when she went to Duke. So we both got to explore this together, kind of with a blank slate.
Having no idea. We bonked and messed up a lot and got injured a few times.
Which I think was great for coaching later on too, because we don't come from this perspective of, oh, this stuff is obvious, it makes sense, or even that running is easy. We totally remember and still have those days where running is freaking impossible. So, I think it gave us a good, we had to learn from the ground up. And so hopefully we can help other people do the same in a really loving and open environment.
I love that. And I knew, Megan, I knew that you did field hockey and then switched to running. But David, I had no clue that you played football. But isn't that one of the beauties of running, though? It's like you as a youth or child athlete, college athlete, like we can do all these other sports and we can keep doing other sports as adults. Like, I don't want to say we can't, we certainly can. But the transition into running is such, I don't want to say easy, but like a natural one for any athlete to do, because it's a part of most sports. And then just exploring that. So I didn't realize that, David, you were a football player. That's a big switch.
Well, especially seeing a picture of me now. Yeah.
I mean, there's all these pictures of David in high school just like flexing and having this like total like bro face on. And it's so different than the attitude that I see you have as a runner. And I never knew him as a football player. And it's kind of like my brain can't even conceive of the concept, even with pictures and videos.
I got to conceive of Megan as a field hockey player because I got to actually go to her games when she was at Duke. And she was such a remarkable athlete and moving so fast up and down the field. So I think it might have been a more natural transition for her in some ways than for me.
I love though that you brought up the point about being able to play different sports in youth. And so in high school, I kind of tried out for both the field hockey and cross country teams at preseason as a freshman and wasn't sure which direction I was going to go. And it was a real big struggle to decide between the two sports. And one of the mentors that I had who worked at a local running store gave me the advice, like, Megan, running is a lifelong sport. Like, make sure play ball sports until you're not getting joy from it, or play ball sports until you no longer have that option anymore. And I'm so grateful I had that advice, because I think by the time I got into running, I was a much more mature athlete, and just really grateful for someone who told me that just be patient with running. It will be there for a long time. And I look back on that with such gratitude.
And whether you're a runner at a young age or not, your relationship with running can constantly evolve. So the type of runner you are at 25 or 35 might be totally different in terms of mindset than you are at 75 or 85. Both are equally beautiful. And I think it gets back to how you have to constantly rethink, your why and what drives you, and making sure it comes from a positive and healthy and loving place. And so, I think we've both remade our running identities and our athletic identities so many times over already. And I can't wait for all the future times we get to remake it together.
Yeah. At what point because both of you are great runners and have, achieved a lot. And so at what point post-college did you guys, was it right away? I want to be competitive with this, or was it just exploring it a little bit? At what point did you guys go, I don't know, like just go big on running, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So I think for me, I actually got a little burnt out on running in college. I think my personality is much more someone who thrives running in the mountains as opposed to like on circles in the track. And so I wound up taking almost an entire summer off of running after finishing up college track. And almost immediately after that, fell in love with trail running. And that was really when I made my deep dive into thinking that, I wanted to race a lot on the trails and just kind of shoot my shot with that. But I think for sure it took that like summer off to let my body decompress after college track.
And I think we both always knew we wanted to compete, whether it was at running or cycling or...
We're going to be competing till we're 70, I hope.
Bocce ball. I think both of us, we love that mindset. And hopefully a way that's like, we don't take it very seriously at the same time. But no matter what it is, like even when we play ping pong or something, it's like games get intense and fun. So yeah, like, for me, I think for Megan, she went on to the track team after field hockey and did amazingly pretty quickly because she's like the best athlete I've ever seen. But for me, it took a lot longer for like it to fully start to express itself. I mean, I had quit football 4 years before when I met Megan and was just starting to be like, oh, I kind of get running a little bit more. And it wasn't until we got to grow into it together that it really started to express itself. It's funny. It's like Megan I said this before, but she is the straw that stirs the drink. And she did that with my like athletics too. So yeah, I mean, but I think for both of us, we're like, well, hopefully we haven't even touched our potential yet. It's all about what's coming. And
I love that.
I want us to think like that even when we're like 60,
Yeah, I love that. And I'm just like loving the vibe of you guys right now. And it's making me happy because it, in a really cheesy way, it reminds me of me and my husband. He's like, just a great overall athlete, but was never a runner per se. But of course he could go run. He's just a good athlete. And then so when we met and I started bringing him on runs with me and he just got like all into it. And he's got the same attitude too of like, we're going to be sponsored athletes at age 60. I'm like, okay, like we'll keep working at it. We'll get there. And just that like passion to compete and better yourself. And it's super exciting to share that with somebody and feel that together. So cool. I'm also hearing from both of you. I'm definitely picking up on both of your like philosophies. And I want to read some things off your website because it's awesome.
Oh man.
Go for it. I love it. How did you do it on our website?
I don't know.
Okay. David, your website says that you started Some Work, All Play with a premise that you could help athletes learn to live like puppies and run like rock stars while not giving an F about things that aren't important. So could you expand on why this approach and language is so important to you when starting your business?
Well, we lost the website password. I mean, we're really strategic with how we try to present this stuff. So like for us, I think a lot of our worldview that we try to like express to others through Swap is that all this stuff really matters, but it also really doesn't. And that goes for athletics. That also goes for like existence more generally, that we're coming to this place of optimism and love and hope from an understanding that we all die and, we're all like running towards the same abyss. And that shared human experience is where it's at. So when we say like live like puppies, what we're trying to say is let's try to live with that like enthusiastic, optimistic, like innocence, even as we know that this running journey is heading down that path. And, so that's basically what we try to help everyone with is that we want to take this sport so freaking seriously, but we want to do it with a big old wink and a nod, a little bit of a laugh behind the like poker face.
And it's amazing. I think for me, like I naturally tend to put like so much pressure on myself as an athlete and to take everything just like so seriously. And meeting David and kind of like hearing his philosophy and working into that as a coach over time, it's amazing how much that has helped me just kind of back off some of that pressure that I put on myself. And I think we find that with other athletes too.
Yeah. Athletes already put enough pressure on themselves. Like we don't need any extra necessarily because it's like part of what's just in your nature as an athlete. I totally agree with that sentiment of like this stuff is so important, but it's not. I was actually on Strong Runner Chicks podcast this week, and I was talking about that in regards to nutrition. And I was like, nutrition is so important, but like, it's not that important because my philosophy around it is like, we don't need to micromanage our nutrition. And it was just such it's so complicated, but so true. This stuff is so important and we want to stress the seriousness of it, but also like if we're not having fun with it, then it loses its importance as well. So I resonate with that from a training perspective and a nutrition perspective for sure. Okay. So Megan, we're going to read some of your bio on the website. You joined Some Work All Play because you wanted to help athletes learn to love the process of training, embrace their inner ninja, and recover using a Taco Tuesday approach. So I would love to hear about this Taco Tuesday approach of recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we've seen time and time again, and then also I've seen in my research, is just the prevalence of like disordered eating or eating disorder behaviors in athletes. And I think like the more that we can have open conversations about the fact that like that may be normal. You know, I just did a research study that found that like 2/3 of women were at risk for moderate or high risk for disordered eating. And so I feel like just trying to bring into coaching this overall approach that like food can be fun. And it's okay if it's not for you. Like I work with a lot of athletes that are like, Megan, like food is really not fun for me. And it's like, that's okay. Like I hear you where you are and I see that. But I think like we at SWAP just try to emphasize the benefit of like eating fun foods, making like eating social, having just like a diverse group of like food groups to choose from, including Taco Tuesday, Waffle Wednesdays, Pasta Fridays. We have like all these different like acronyms and fun terms that we use in SWAP. And I think it's really helped a lot of athletes just kind of embrace that process and then also recognize too that it's really about like Taco Tuesday isn't just about like thinking about fueling for tomorrow. It's really about like longevity as an athlete because like fueling the body is all about longevity and performance in sport. And so it comes at it both from a fun and performance standpoint.
Yeah, we do try to introduce a lot of fun too. I was thinking that sometimes in the training logs, it's particularly after races or when athletes have like a rest day or two, we'll put like, depending on their dietary constituent, burgers, pizza, fries, or whatever. And then sometimes the athletes will be like, oh, I'm really sorry. I had to go off plan and I had enchiladas. And right, okay, that kind of works, but next time stick with the burger plan.
I love that. Do you ever encounter athletes who aren't used to this and are hesitant to eat the burger and fries that you're telling them to?
I think quite often, actually. I think that's probably even the most common response amongst athletes that we coach. And I would say that usually athletes feel very like free over time as they like work into this mentality. But also too, we refer a lot of athletes to nutritionists just because we realize that like we can be the people that emphasize that like food is fun and eating diverse, food groups are awesome. But at the end of the day too, like talking and meeting with a nutritionist is super helpful. And that's why I love like the work that you're doing is because we just love having like people in this field that we can point to and be like, follow Lindsay on Instagram or like, follow this person. Their account is super helpful.
Yeah. And I think where an athlete is on day one is one thing, but a great part about coaching is you're so zoomed out that where an athlete is at day 2001 can be totally different. And, I think one thing that we can do, even though we're not experts in this field, though Megan has a great research background in related areas, is we can be that constant, enthusiastic presence that emphasizes this point, not just because it's the best way to like health and enjoying life, but also because it's the best way to performance. And that's why like, in my particular conversations, especially, I try to ground it all in performance and performance science because I am not a nutritionist. I want people to talk to nutritionists, but I do know about performance and I have coached a lot of some of the best athletes in the world and all of them that have any sort of, longevity to day 2001 are doing the same type of thing, even if they have slightly different approaches to the specifics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you guys work and the athletes you work with. I know you work with some really high level athletes. Could you just share with our audience, the type of athletes you work with? We'll just start there.
Yeah, we work with a wide range of athletes, people who are doing, just starting running for the first time, all the way up to we've had athletes win, national championship, world championships, a diverse range of trail, OCR, road running, track running. Actually, we just had an athlete win the mountain bike national championship. And so it's really cool to get to coach that range of sport and then also just learn. I mean, I think the greatest thing for me as a coach is, I've been in a lot of different like working experiences and I just learned so much as a coach and really grateful for athletes that let us into their lives. And I feel like it's such a privilege to get to learn from the athletes that we coach.
Yeah. And then like logistically, we try to check in with all of our athletes basically every day. And it creates this back and forth dialogue and comfort where hopefully just about everything will come up. I mean, I've almost never been surprised by something at like day 1000 because we talk to our athletes more than we talk to our families, everyone other than ourselves and Addie Dog. So it creates this environment where, especially things like, nutrition practices, it's going to become relevant at some point in an athletic journey, even if it's just in like a super general way. And so we get in on those journeys very early and hopefully are able to recognize, particularly in athletes that might be prone to like some disordered behaviors or thoughts, that, we do have a role there, even if that role is purely a supportive one to like validate the concerns without validating the exact behaviors.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it sounds like your coaching is very individualized, very like one-on-one, building those relationships, constant communication, and open to working with athletes of all levels.
Absolutely. Yeah. When actually in our training log, we have these different categories where athletes write things like what workout they did, how they felt, etc. And we have just this column for life. And I feel like that life column sometimes for athletes spans like 5 paragraphs, depending upon what's going on for the day. Yeah, and I think like for me, I learn a lot about life in like individuals and how people are coping in there, but also that informs about training too. And so I feel like it's really relevant. Like a lot of the information in the life column is super relevant for performance, and it's been rewarding to see that over time.
Yeah, I feel like the training logs could be their own books. They would be fantastic. I mean, so we were just at the Western States 100 where we had a bunch of our athletes racing, and like, and the coolest part of all though to me was you're at the finish line where athletes have dug so deep, and especially for the professional runners, this is like a huge deal for their professional, like they're when they're putting food on the table type stuff. Like you're like, this is also one of my best friends, and that feeling is so empowering for us, and like purposeful, and it's incredibly cool.
We've never been social, actually, like super social. And now we have like all of these friends from athletes we coach. I'm like, how are we this social? It's so awesome. It's amazing. Yeah.
It's great. It's the best friends while also being moderately introverted. It's perfect.
Great.
It is a little bit funny in the line of work that you guys do. And I think even my work too, it's like you build such close relationships with your clients. You do feel like friends. It's like, wait, is this a professional relationship? And it's, screw it. We're friends.
Unfortunately, I feel like because of how we're mostly talking about like training and things like that, we can lean very hard on the friends thing. Like we say that like we're friends with expertise, and that's the framework fully, because we're not coming in like a clinical or almost like the health stuff we do talk about is more as, we're going to refer you to someone rather than we are going to be the expert. So we don't have to maintain a formality or even professionalism beyond the trust element. So yeah, I mean, I was looking over Megan's shoulder while she was updating logs recently. I was like, that's a lot of exclamation points.
A lot of jokes in there.
My shift key, we're on my computer here. My shift key is totally worn down from pressing capital letters. So it's super fun. And then all of our, over time, like after 2,000 days, our athletes will come like visit us. And it's just like, oh yeah, this is so natural and perfect.
Natural. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's the most fun thing, and also incredibly illuminating for us. And we get to learn so much.
Yeah. You guys also just gave me a brilliant idea, or well, it's your idea. Maybe it's already been done before, but like if you did take excerpts from training logs and put that into a book, that'd be a really cool book.
I love that idea. Well, it's very comforting for me as a coach because, I go through all the same struggles that my athletes go through. And I think as I go through training logs, it normalizes it for me in a way that's like, oh, Megan, like I'm not weird for experiencing this. And I feel like if we were able to take those excerpts from the training logs, like across everyone, like recreational athletes are often going through the same things as like elite athletes or people who are winning national championships. And I think it's just going to normalize things for everyone.
Yeah, I feel like if everyone could have just a window into our brains and what we've seen, and I'm sure it's the same for you, Lindsay, you'd have so much compassion for everyone in the world. Like, I mean, there's some people that perhaps, maybe like 1 or 2 people that don't deserve compassion, but like everyone else, existence is complicated. And that's why, like, when we were talking about living like a puppy, it's like, hey guys, a lot of this sucks. And let's try to laugh as much as we possibly can today.
Yeah. So interesting. I want to shift gears a little bit. And Megan, just focus on some of the work that you've been doing recently. So you're currently getting your PhD in epidemiology. And to my knowledge, you've done a lot of work on injury, I think genetics with injuries, the Healthy Runner Project, bone stress injuries in athletes. Can you tell us a little bit maybe about some of the research you're currently doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll dive into kind of the most recent. So we were just at the Western States Endurance Run, which is this 100-mile race in California. This year it was hot. Mm-hmm. It was like a very challenging race for runners. But I've gotten to work with Dr. Emily Krause there. I believe she was on your podcast before. For the last 3 years. And so we've been looking at like the prevalence of disordered eating behaviors in ultramarathon runners, and then also bone stress injury risk, genetic risk, and overall like serologic or blood profile of athletes and how that predicts for bone stress injuries. And super interesting. I mean, what we found actually is, as I mentioned before, female athletes just being at very high risk for disordered eating. So about 2/3 of female athletes at moderate or high risk for disordered eating, which is high. I think for me, that was pretty eye-opening. Another interesting finding from that was we actually found that 1/3 of women sustained a BSI at some point, a bone stress injury at some point, but actually less women had low bone mineral density. And so I think oftentimes people associate bone stress injury risk with low bone mineral density, but it's often so multifactorial. Like, there's often genetic risk involved, biomechanics risk involved. Sometimes, athletes may have low energy availability, and that doesn't necessarily impact bone mineral density until many years later. And so it was very interesting to just kind of understand the full risk profile of an ultramarathon runner.
Yeah. Yeah, the numbers are staggering, which is why I can't stress it enough. And I hope that I'm not a broken record on my own podcast, but just why I talk about disordered eating so often is because it is so prevalent. And it's so prevalent even if you don't know it, right? There's a lot of disordered eating and eating disorders that are undiagnosed and even unrecognized by yourself, by your coaches, by your teammates. But when we really dig into it and we look at the numbers and then it's even, we get to this point where we're like, but wait, these are just our research numbers. What are the numbers like outside of research? Because I always imagine they're even larger,
Absolutely.
than what you can capture.
That's so true. And I think I love the point that you brought up about the fact that it may not even be intentional. And actually the way that we structured the survey was to capture both unintentional and intentional disordered eating behaviors. So sometimes athletes may not even be aware of the fact that they're at risk for disordered eating or may have disordered eating, which I think is fascinating and really underscores the idea that like talking about this openly is so valuable, but also like working with RDs, working with nutritionists is also so valuable too, because sometimes you just don't know. And for me as a coach, sometimes athletes can go kind of extended periods of time without seeing the long-term consequences of that, such as like loss of periods, bone stress injuries, but like lower bone mineral density. And a lot of that is genetic. And so I think, for Emily and Dr. Emily Krause and I, it's really about talking about this early and identifying this early. That way we can prevent some of the long-term consequences.
Yeah, I think that genetic factor is huge. I don't have any statistics to back this up, but just in the clients that I work with, it's like, I never know like who's going to be the client that like did get the 4 stress fractures within their first 2 years of underfueling. And then who's the client who's been underfueling for 10 years and has never had a bone stress injury, and it's actually, it's sad and difficult either way. For one, it's like, okay, the person who's had multiple bone stress injuries and stress fractures, like that's tragic for them. But then for the person who doesn't, in a really terrifying way, because they've never been injured, they don't see a reason to change their nutrition. And it's just like, yeah, that's always a hard thing to work through.
Oftentimes what I see in athletes who may have, this very lucky genetic roll of the dice and may not be prone to injuries or we actually say that bone mineral density is about 40 to 60% genetic, which is a very large component. And so, if an athlete doesn't have, like high risk for bone stress injury or may not be getting injured, but is having this disordered eating behaviors, oftentimes we see a hit on performance, but that may take, months or years to come. And sometimes, it can be more challenging to address it at that point. And so it's really interesting what you brought up about kind of the challenge in both areas.
And that's one reason we, like, at least when we talk about this with athletes, we almost always try to frame it in the context of performance, because injuries are an imperfect feedback mechanism. And
they're also not sexy either.
Yeah.
Like if you tell an athlete, and I think it's very hard for an athlete, like if an athlete's never been injured, like pulling the injury card and being like, well, you may be at higher risk of injury.
Yeah.
You might. It's very hard for the brain to justify and grasp onto that. But performance is very sexy.
Oh, yeah.
So sexy.
We write a lot of like articles for Trail Runner magazine and things. And like our articles that are on performance, right to the top of the charts, you write an article on injury and it's like, that'll languish at the bottom of the page a little bit. Yeah. So, I mean, but the thing is, the studies on performance are so unequivocal that low energy availability absolutely destroys it relatively quickly. Though that there's probably a genetic component there to how long it takes, but it is an absolutely inevitable endpoint. And so, we really focus not only on low energy availability, like across days, but also within day energy deficits, which even when you control for day over day caloric intake, higher rates of within day energy deficits cause worse hormone balance, worse metabolic rates, and worse hormones and performance overall. And, also avoiding fasted training for female athletes. Like that is one of our biggest crusades in this world, is like, there's almost no reason for a female athlete to ever train in a fasted state or do long runs without fuel. And emphasizing that particularly for we coach a lot of people that are marathon champions or ultra champions. It's like, it's impossible to do that if you're playing this game. And men may be playing a slightly different game given the role of testosterone in this process. And I think that's sometimes hard to realize, because we saw, the article we saw in a magazine that's geared towards female athletes that was on fasted training potentially having benefits. And I was like, well, every single one of those studies has pure male participation. Like,
wow.
It absolutely wouldn't work the other way around.
And I'm glad that you're bringing up kind of the within day energy deficits in the overall context of low energy availability, because oftentimes where we see the first impacts of this are when you go and do blood work on an athlete and you look at an athlete's estrogen levels, testosterone levels, thyroid hormones, even ferritin, vitamin D. It's sometimes you just look at those, the broad spectrum of levels, and everything just feels slightly off. Like things may be low normal, some values may be low. And that's what I love about doing the research, is really just trying to establish these hormonal profiles that may indicate these processes are happening early on before these long-term consequences happen. That way we can identify it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like maybe an athlete hasn't, hit the wall yet and, they're not anemic yet or anything. They're generally feeling okay, but we see that their iron's slightly low, their vitamin D is slightly low, and they just they're not giving you feedback of like, I'm feeling great this morning. And then you look at their nutrition as well, and it's like, yeah, we're seeing some gaps. And I also first of all, I just want to say 100% in agreement with everything you guys just said. So just 100%.
Yeah, it's like, whoosh.
But
like,
please also correct
yes,
me, in particular me.
We're constantly trying to learn, so we really just want people to reach out, let us know if we said anything wrong.
Yeah, no, 100% agreement in everything you just said, and I love to bringing up the within day energy deficit. And I want to clarify this for our listeners. So and I'm going to use numbers just for the sake of making it easy. Okay. This is not a prescription for anybody, but let's say that your body needs 3,500 calories a day, and you do eat 3,500 calories by the end of the day. You do get that amount, but throughout the day, you were in a deficit of maybe for 4 hours, you were in a deficit of 1,500 calories during your long run. And then another part of the day, you were in a deficit of 1,000 calories. That is what we mean by within day deficits. Even at the end of the day, you ate what you needed to from a numbers perspective. And this is, I think, really important. Well, it's important no matter what, but definitely in endurance sports, because you'll go out for a 4-hour run or a 4-hour ride. And it's very difficult not to go in a deficit during those times.
One of the reasons we absolutely love nutritionists and think that every athlete that is thinking about these issues a lot needs like a formal nutritionist is one of the fascinating findings of those studies. I believe it was in like the Scandinavian Journal of Sports Medicine that like chronicled athletes' nutrition for this amount of time, found that counterintuitively frequency of eating was associated with higher within day deficits and worse outcomes. So often people that were like eating little 100 calorie or two, or whatever, I don't want to put numbers on it, but were eating little snacks and not eating filling meals, were falling into this trap, even likely because there were some like controlling behaviors there that us as coaches might be able to say, hey, we recognize this, but not then rectify. I mean, Megan always calls it, what do you say?
I call it the satisfaction bomb of just having like a big meal and feeling satisfied. Like I feel like for me, if I have like a pasta dinner at night, it totally hits this different satisfaction bomb that I attribute to actually like the hormonal profile that's happening as you eat food and your brain becomes satisfied compared to having like, you know, many snacks throughout the day. And it's a totally different feeling. And I think it is important. I know I work with some athletes who struggle when they feel like their stomach is full or they struggle with bigger meals. And I think sometimes it's just really important to have that like satisfaction bomb.
And then calorie containing beverages was the other big thing that like the people that were willing to have calorie containing beverages avoided some of the negative outcomes more than others.
Which I think there's probably a lot of confounding there because people who are willing to have calorie containing beverages may fall into slightly different eating behaviors overall.
Eating habits.
Yeah, eating habits overall. And so there's a lot of confounders there, but I think it's really interesting. I loved this article in the Science in general.
That's a true scientist right there, picking apart and saying, well, we can, that's not causation just yet.
Story of my life.
This is basically the story of our podcast. I'm like, but wait, there was only 15 participants and none of those were female.
But yeah, so I'll have to check out that study because I don't know the specific study you're talking about, but I do understand this concept of like maybe just like snacking and small little meals or grazing, what some people call it. If we're never filling up and getting actually to a surplus, then what's happening is we're so quickly in an energy deficit, right? Like 100 calories here, well, that's not holding you over at all. And the next thing you know, you're in a big deficit, and that can create those within day deficits. And so allowing yourself, there's so many different styles and ways of eating that, and everybody's a little unique with their thing. But I do understand what you're saying, Megan, of like, fill up, have a meal and be full. Don't be afraid to be full. And that's going to give your body the nourishment as well as mental satisfaction bomb, but the nourishment that your body needs to hold you over and prevent these deficits throughout the day. And especially as an athlete, when we are active and exercise is inherently, going to put you in a deficit because that's just the nature of exercise, that you actually need to almost like preload and afterwards like get in a surplus as well to try and really mitigate those effects as much as possible.
I love how you talk about this. I feel like, so we've done a few presentations on within day energy deficits, and I feel like I need a recording of the way that you summarize this and describe this so I can press record as we do our presentations and just be like, this is Lindsay. She described it perfectly. Defer to her. I think the last one for me on within day energy deficits is I think the biggest red flag that I see are athletes who aren't properly fueling their exercise during exercise. That is a place where having these, like, for me, like when I do exercise, sometimes I'm just like sipping on gels frequently throughout. And it's like, it's totally okay to have some of these, at least from my perspective, to have some of these like, smaller snacks and exercise. But we see, I think a big red flag for us is athletes who are just like not fueling their long runs or long endurance activities properly. And that's often just like such a risk factor for injury.
And a risk factor for performance. Like,
Huge.
I think one of the big explanations of our team's success over time, particularly for female athletes, is throwing as much fuel in the fire as possible. The fire is just going to burn hotter. And that's actually one of the findings about all of these studies on energy availability that I think is maybe the hardest to reconcile with our brains that like things in physiology to be so ordered, is that it changes metabolic rate. So, you can't tell by looking at yourself or someone else looking at you or the scale or any of these things that we might use to judge ourselves. Even if we don't have dysmorphia and totally are able to see it from an objective perspective, it's like if you're having higher deficits, your body's just going to turn down the thermostat. And if you turn down the thermostat, your body's not adapting. Even if you're able to avoid injury, you're going to slow down over time. It's like, let's turn that fire up as high as we possibly can get it. And that's how you're going to see what your true potential is, not just as a runner or a biker, but like in your whole life.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely love the analogy of your metabolism to a burning fire. And it's like the wood is the fuel and you have to keep adding more fuel to grow the flame and keep it going. And the less fuel you put in there, that flame just, decreases and eventually completely burns out and then you're left with nothing. So such a good analogy and such a good, like for our listeners who are more visual, something to remember. So such a good one. I could keep talking to you guys all day. I want to ask you, just since I have like more coaches and exercise physiologists, like just some random questions that I have and I want your perspective on. So not necessarily nutrition related, but I just want to hear your perspective. In endurance training, the 80-20 rule, have 80% of your runs be easy runs and 20%, more high intensity, high effort runs. What's your philosophies on that?
So we're focused much less on like changing the volume of intensity than we are on focus on running economy. So we want faster paces to take less energy rather than to practice using more energy over time and just cranking up that level so much. So what we focus a lot more on than worried about the exact percentage are things like strides, making an athlete really, really, really freaking fast with the energy we are using, and then interval workouts that are largely focused on less overall volume and intensity, more on efficiency of that intensity. So, an athlete that's really advanced might be able to do, let's say, 40 by 1 minute or 25 by 1 minute intervals and still maintain their performance level. Instead of that, we'll do something like 10 to 15 by 1 minute and make them maybe even a little bit quicker or a little bit more efficient so that an athlete isn't breaking down. And over time, what we see with athletes is that running economy ceiling gets higher and higher and higher, so that when we do go out and do some of the specific workouts that might be higher volume tempo style workouts, they're able to go way faster than they would have if they just emphasized from the beginning, okay, well, this is one of my 20% runs, so I'm going to go out and do, 10 miles of total intensity to get up to that level in my 50-mile week. And by doing that, I think we're able to zoom out and see athletes progress over many years, whereas some of the adaptations from high volumes of intensity will just happen very fast otherwise.
I think the other thing too is that as coaches, we're really data driven, but we try to take some of that data focus. Like we try for our athletes to go out and have it be more intuitive in terms of their own training. And sometimes athletes push back against that at first. Like, please tell me what zone I need to run in, what are my exact heart rate? What's my exact pace? And we really push intuitive running and learning to develop feel over time. And we find that it's amazing for long-term performance, long-term enjoyment of running. And then here as coaches, we kind of do the data synthesis on the back end. But I think the other important thing, even though I love data, I love working with numbers, the body doesn't know numbers, it knows effort. And so I think we really hesitate to give general theories like 80-20 or things along these lines, just because it's all so amorphous. The body is just really responding to effort, not numbers, even though I would love to ascribe it to numbers. And that's been something that we've really reinforced with our athletes over time.
Yeah. And that totally leads to my very next question, which was about heart rate training. I've never dabbled in it myself. I'm actually even the type of, I'm much more intuitive with my training. I don't wear my watch all day long. And that's also stemming from, quite frankly, some of the eating stuff too. I don't want to know how many steps and how many calories I've burned all day long. So I've never paid that much attention personally to my heart rate and heart rate training. So I kind of already know your answer, but yeah, is that something that you guys look into at all?
So we were actually just the most recent edition of Runner's World profiled us on this exact topic as coaches. But the general idea is we do want an athlete to be able to calibrate their feel. So feel really does matter. But if you have no concept of feel, and that is particularly something that is relevant for athletes that are highly driven, maybe some of the athletes that might have struggled with eating issues in the past, it's also the type of athlete that can push themselves very hard. And over time, it actually does feel easy to them. And there's this offset between physiological stress and mental, emotional stress, and just bringing those so that we have a little bit of overlap is super key. So with heart rate monitors, what we generally do is okay, we just want to calibrate your easy if we fear that you don't know what that exactly means, which is really hard as a runner because sometimes it's really easy to just run everything moderate and not have any idea.
And I fall into that category as a runner where I feel like I get so excited. I get so many endorphins from running that I could go out and just be like, that run was totally easy. I give it an RPE of 3. But if I go back and look at the data, my heart rate may be at 175. And so for me, it's actually I enjoy data, and it's also a very useful check just to make sure, when I'm running uphill at altitude on an easy run, my heart rate's not creeping up into the 170s, because that's something that could very easily happen.
So Megan's my coach, and last night I had a double on the treadmill uphill, and she gave me a heart rate cap for it, which is a very rare thing for
I don't
us,
usually do that.
But she suspected that I was going too hard on these. And sure enough, I had been going too hard on these. So even someone that, I've been doing this for a long time now, I coach it. Like I still struggle with that. And the general way, if an athlete ever is curious, you don't need to ever wear your heart monitor after you get it figured out, but we like the Friel test, which is a 30-minute tempo where you run pretty hard. The last 20 minutes of that is probably around your lactate threshold or close enough to estimate your lactate threshold heart rate. You can then multiply that by anywhere from 0.85 to 0.88 or somewhere like that, a little bit lower if you're an advanced athlete that's run a lot of miles, a little bit higher if you're newer. That gives you an idea for your aerobic threshold. Your easy days, so, most of your running should be around there or below. And having that framework, not at all essential on most runs. But when you start to have doubts, when you start to feel a little run down, knowing that you have like an actual quantitative understanding that your brain is not playing tricks on you can be super helpful.
Yeah. And I agree from a running data perspective and a nutrition data perspective. For so many of my clients, there is a certain time when I'm working with them where we do not talk calories. We do not talk grams because it can be toxic or hurtful and harmful. But then there's this point where it's like, where can this data help us? Kind of quality check. I think that was the term you used, Megan, or like, just so I know I'm not hurting myself, right? And I think we can do the same thing with nutrition too, when we're in a good mental space to talk about it, to know like, wait, I need to be getting 100 grams of carbs and 30 grams of protein post-workout. And I need to be reaching at least this amount of calories and having an awareness of it. I like to call that like nutrition and calorie macro awareness can help us, especially as athletes. These are some really important topics. It's data awareness instead of data obsession.
Yeah, I love that. And I think being attuned to like the body and self to know where you fall on that awareness to obsession spectrum, and kind of like, I have some athletes who like, may get really excited about these numbers and are kind of like tracking them more obsessively. And it's like just staying in check with like where you are on that spectrum and like having that really healthy dialogue with self, I feel like is so helpful.
And yet, not only numbers that we recommend are occasional numbers that might change interventions in a concrete, focused way.
Yeah.
So heart rate at a start, or when an athlete is in a different place or doing something like I was doing, which is running uphill on the treadmill, that's unique and you have no concept of it, that might help. Things that don't help, we don't have any of our athletes have pace on their watch face. Like we don't want your watch to be splitting out miles.
Especially instantaneous pace, because it's often wrong.
Yeah,
I've done workouts where like I'm looking down at my watch and I'm running so fast. And
so sorry about Addie Dog over there. She's like, no, numbers are not helpful. Addie, come. Sorry.
Totally okay. Dog is on the website as well with also a great bio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
She's a co-coach.
She's showing her dark side, which is UPS trucks.
She's like, I don't like instantaneous pace either.
But yeah, so we don't like those numbers. Don't change interventions because that doesn't have any bearing on effort except one or two. It's a proxy variable for effort. Effort is something that is an internal metric, not an output metric. And so that's one thing. And then when we're talking about like, we would never engage with an athlete on calories. That would be something we have nutritionists do. But like, we don't care about what the scale says. Like we haven't had a scale in
years,
10 years, 8 years, something like that. And we don't want our athletes to have any idea either, unless they're being directed by an expert that is then changing an intervention based on that number. Even at the doctor's office, I'm like, turn around on the scale and make sure they don't tell you what that number is unless you concretely need to know it for some odd reason that I can't think of. It's like, there's no benefit to that number. And like, I mean, as a runner, what we see is like, the concept that lower is better is totally wrong across the board. Maybe there's extremes where it might be relevant, but that's one of those numbers that is almost purely caustic, I think, to someone's self-love.
I love the way that you said like that the numbers and the data we're tracking, it has to be based on like, is this going to change a behavior or an intervention in some way? And that's a really important thing to think about. Like, is what I'm tracking relevant to anything at all? And a great example with your weight, it's really not. So we have so many other ways to measure performance. And I'll even go to the extent of measuring health, like with blood work, that we don't need the scale to do that for us because it's not really doing it. Also, you may have just influenced me positively. My watch face, the biggest number on it is my active pace. So maybe that's something I need to consider changing.
I was going to say, I think it will bring about a lot of joy. So I had that metric on my watch probably for about a year. It may have been the greatest day of my running life removing it. And I felt just like so free and happy. I was looking at my watch a whole lot less. It was fantastic.
My general thing is I start the watch and then the watch face has, one, it doesn't buzz. Two, it has like the meaningless metric. Well, it has time and then it has like cadence or something random like that. And then I press stop at the end and that's it.
We should just create a data screen that says like believe or you are loved or you got this. And I feel like that can override the instantaneous pace data screen.
Exactly. Just like instead of mile splits, there's you are loved splits.
Yeah. Or just tells you you're permanently running a 4-minute mile.
Yeah. I mean, and that's actually the thing is like you look at how the physiology works over time and an athlete usually adapts to the level that they expect and think that they're adapting to. And you see this most obviously in places where there are GPS dead zones or areas where the watches read a little bit wrong. There are some places in the country, there were some in California where we
often tracks actually.
Yeah, that measure fast or it tells you you're going faster than you are. And there are places that don't, like Forest Park in, I believe, Portland, that measure slow almost across the board. And the athletes that think they are running faster get faster than the athletes that think they are running slower. And so, one of the big things is taking off those constraints of self-judgment, because not only is it not helpful and not relevant to how your physiology actually adapts, because at the cellular level, which is where we're worried about, none of that stuff is relevant whatsoever. A cell has no effing clue about your miles pace. But what does matter is the psychological and physiological context by which adaptations will end up happening. And so if you can form that, like when we say that you are loved, scream, like if that can actually be a thing that you feel in your life, you're also going to adapt way better and way faster. And that's not just for like wishy-washy, you are loved stuff, which we are really about. It's also for athletes that are trying to make the freaking Olympics and athletes that we work with that are like putting food on the table with their performance.
Yes.
So you are loved screams basically all the way down. Your scales, your watch.
I love it.
Actually, I just got a really cute beaded bracelet, like the ones that I made as a 5-year-old that said believe on it. And I was like, I'm definitely going to treat myself to that.
I love it.
It's so interesting how all of this information like affects us so much. And I have a little story too. I have a Sunta watch, and at the end of every run, when I click save, it asks me, how was your run? And it has these little smiley faces. So it's like this huge grin to say excellent, or like a smile for good, or like a meh, like a okay. And then there's a bad and a poor and these sad faces. And when I first got this watch, I was like doing that. And I realized myself after a while, this is bad for me. So it's been over a year. It's probably been close to 2 years now. Every single run is excellent with the biggest grin face. That. Doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter. I'm just like, excellent, excellent, excellent every time I finish my run. And it's seriously been it's impacted me for real. And I noticed the impact when I started logging poor runs, because you just put in all that effort, and sure, it was hard or something wasn't great about it, but and then you say that was poor. And it was like, it really brought me down after probably having this watch for like 6 months. And then, so I switched that. And so if you have a watch that you can do that, just every run is excellent, no matter what.
I love that idea.
Yeah, I mean,
actually, I have a Whoop, and it asks you to grade it on a scale of like 1 to 20 in terms of how you felt. And I'm always like 20, or I think it's 1 to 15. I can't remember what it is, but I'm always like, I'm much the same way. I'm like, I can't even begin to look at this for myself. So I'm just going to hit the top number.
Well, it just gets to the point that self-judgment is such and sometimes it comes from like really honest places, but often it is a cop out to not be truly vulnerable, to see what happens when you dare to believe in yourself. And believing in yourself doesn't mean like you're going to win a freaking race. It just means that you're going to resolve to keep getting back up, to show up, to try to like do these self-belief love things that Megan's talking about. And Megan's like that exactly. Every single meal with Megan is the greatest meal we've ever had.
Which is awesome because we're terrible cooks.
Yeah. It's perfect. Like the fact that she grades every one of my meals with that big smiley face gives me, I've become a better cook because I have more validation, because if it wasn't that, I would literally never do anything, because I'd be like, well, what's even the point? I suck at this.
Yeah. It's that positive energy just creates more positive energy, right? And just this cycle. And it's something we can apply to so many different areas of our life.
The main thing to emphasize for people that might be skeptical about that is the cellular thing that we were just talking about. This cellular context that is embodied in cortisol, your hormonal state, your everything about stress, is meant to adapt in these places of feeling good, of being slightly more uplifted. Like that all correlates with things that we would find if we pricked you and gathered some blood. And so, that's not always possible, but the more you can encourage that, the more you can let your, your inner ninja, your inner puppy, like all that stuff actually come out in the context of running or being a partner or whatever else it is.
I think what's interesting about that too is it's often about like the collection of people that you've been around most recently that I feel like sometimes for me, like I am such an empath that I often embody the emotion or the feelings of people that I've been around. And so I'm really careful. Like David is amazing for the energy because he brings that like positivity and that love and that like that reminder that I'm always enough. And I think that's been fundamental for me is like, surrounding myself with people that just make me feel like that big smiley face on the, with also like authentic like vulnerability and the ability to like share and like embrace the hard stuff together. But like at the end of the day, I hit that smiley face and I'm like, that's how I felt about our relationship.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Yeah, we've talked about so many awesome things on this podcast so far. So I want to just wrap up with a few more fun questions. I call them my rapid fire questions, but typically they're not that fast. But we're gonna go for it. You ready?
Let's do it.
If you could eat one food every single day for the rest of your life, but never, ever get sick of it, what would it be?
Megan has never been sick of a food in her entire life.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Stone cold fact.
Yeah, I love all food.
When I say, her answer is every single food. And you'll give a real answer soon, you're thinking right now. Because I'm not joking. I can't even think of something that you don't love.
I like all food, to be honest with you. I don't like vegan cheese. There's something about it that's like it's very strange to me. I can't do it. Pizza, I think for sure.
Yeah.
Pepperoni pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah. French fries have always been, ever since I was a little kid, something I love. But I mean,
with lots of ketchup.
We literally would never, with lots of ketchup. Sometimes ketchup on the pizza too.
Yes.
Pepperoni pizza and French fries with lots of ketchup. Never get sick of it. I love it.
God, never. And like, we're not saying that this is a periodic thing. Like, we're all about this. Like, for athletes in particular, like, have fun. Like, what is fun to you, as long as you're not like dying of heart disease or something, or a doctor or nutritionist has an intervention with you for some reason. It's like that fun stuff is going to be the thing that lets your spirit shine the most.
Mm-hmm. Agree. So I don't want to make an assumption. So my next question is, what is your favorite sport to participate in?
Megan might have an interesting answer on this one right now.
Yeah. So I've had kind of like a long-term-ish health issue. And so I'm not able to run as much as I would like to right now. I'm actually going to go, so as a result, I'm going to go for a tie between trail running and gravel biking. I'm hoping to do some gravel racing coming up. So
yeah, she is a monstrous cyclist.
Oh, it's very fun.
It's remarkable to see. So I'll say, I mean, my obvious answer is running, but my backup answer is playing horse with Megan at the basketball court.
We get very competitive in basketball with each other.
Yeah.
I love that. Playing horse. That's the first one. I haven't played that game in so long.
We actually usually play something ridiculous. We change the word. We play like cookie or like square or whatever.
Well, actually, it's relevant because the girl that won the spelling bee last night is also a basketball superstar.
She probably plays some crazy.
She's like one of the top.
She probably plays some like unbelievable words.
Yeah. Can you imagine the words she's playing?
Yeah.
No one ever is going to beat her, even if they could shoot better than her, because they'll never be able to spell it.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. How about as a spectator? What are your favorite sports to be spectators at?
I'm definitely basketball.
I'm going to say NCAA basketball. Right now we're watching the Tour de France.
Yeah,
It's incredible. We love watching it so much, like the stories, the heartaches, the everything about it. It's like beautiful too. Watching there.
If Western States was like more often, that would be our answer. Like going there and watching our athletes and watching everyone was uplifting and inspiring and also scary. Mix of things that you could ever imagine, which is what sports is all about.
Yeah, totally. I love the Tour de France as well. I grew up watching that, still watch it. So it's been like since I was like 5 years old. It's like a thing every summer to look forward to,
I love how long it is and how consistent it is. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, awesome. All right, final question. If there's a female athlete that you want to give a shout out to that you just really inspires you, and this can be, a professional high level athlete or someone in your personal life, who would that be?
I might be stealing David's answer.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm going with Katie Asmuth. Did I just steal your answer?
That was one of my first ones, so I can go to the backups.
Katie just ran an incredible Western States. She is just like this, like joy and shining light. And we met her, we met her in person for the first time at Western States. And all of our thoughts about like her joy and just like her energy were fully validated within 30 seconds when we got like the biggest, warmest hug ever. And I just love how she brings together this like fierce competitive nature and then marries that with like a love of community and a love of sport. And it's such a beautiful way to compete. And I'm kind of in awe and very inspired about that.
I love that. Katie's the absolute best. I'm going to say Megan, which is not being cheesy. Like, even if I had no idea who Megan was, I would be the world's biggest fan of her. So, she referred obliquely to some of the health issues she's going through. And, the whole time she's maintained this steadfast, like, understanding that belief doesn't mean, everything's going perfectly. It means getting back up when things aren't. And, sure enough, this weekend, we're going to go on a bike ride and she's going to absolutely rip my quads to shreds piece by piece. And I'm going to love every second right up until the moment my legs like officially fall off. But it's one of the most remarkable and impressive things I've ever seen. And I can't wait to see where it goes from here.
Oh, thank you.
I love it. Thank you both so much for having this amazing conversation, sharing your philosophies, your coaching expertise, your knowledge on nutrition and training and female athletes. This was just so awesome to talk with you both. So I will include links in our show notes, but do you want to just tell our listeners verbally where they can find you guys at?
Yeah, so I guess swaprunning.com is our website. I got that right?
You did.
Yes, I nailed it.
But
I looked at you. I was like, I haven't said this in a while.
Some Work All Play podcast is probably the big one where
true.
we're dedicating a little bit of our creative energies right now.
Also, David has a dog account on Instagram as his main coaching account. So like when people like tag him as a coach, they're actually tagging our dog, which I find hilarious. It's Addie does stuff on Instagram.
It's truly the best when like someone wins a big race or whatever, and it's like, thanks to my coach, this dog. Which we're being honest in our advertising on the website, at least.
Yes.
Yes, you are being honest, transparent, vulnerable, just informative. Thank you all so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. This was such a fun conversation. I'm like, can we do this every Friday? This is awesome.
You freaking rock. Thank you for sharing your brilliance with the world. It's absolutely changing everything. And thanks to everyone for listening. We love you all.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
I really hope you enjoyed that episode and thanks for listening. But before I let you go, I have free resources that you can have access to right away, right now, so that you can start fueling your body as a fierce, fit, and fueled female athlete. First, I have your Red S recovery race. If you've ever wondered if you might be struggling with Red S, curious to learn more, or know you have Red S and are looking to recover fast, then you can head to www.riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS and download the Red S Recovery Race. See how you place and figure out the next steps to recovery. Plus, while there, I have a few other great resources for you, including 3 nutrition secrets that every elite athlete swears by, and access to our private Facebook community, Female Athlete Nutrition. So again, to gain access to all of this, head to riseupnutritionrun.com/RedS. That's /REDS. And you can gain access and get the help you need fast. Too many girls and women and female athletes struggle with nutrition, but you don't have to any longer. Become fierce, fit, and fueled. Links in the show notes, and I'll see you next time.